Okay, well, I have been engaged in interdisciplinary research combining science and philosophy, but it started with teaching. After years of teaching environmental ethics and ending up depressing the class and myself, so much that we were almost paralyzed, I thought that it would be a good idea to try to find a way to study these ethical issues, but do it with someone like an engineer who knows how to do things, so that we could actually structure the course around projects that would lead to some sort of solution to these problems. And so I applied for and got a humanities fellowship to develop this course with Suk Sadhu, who's been my loyal partner all these years. And the course is structured around teams of students from the major in engineering, natural sciences, social sciences, and humanities, each of them tackling some specific problem from their disciplinary point of view. And we've worked with Citywide Development Corporation, the City of Dayton, South Park Neighborhood Association, and succeeded in implementing some of these projects. In the first semester we worked on sustainability projects with the university. We've been less successful there in implementing the projects. So part of this has to do, something that I understood before I entered this team teaching relationship, was that the nature of duty is such that you really have to, if you're talking about the environment and our duties towards the environment, you have to link it with science and engineering, because you can't say that you have a duty to solve some problem if you're unaware of the problem. And it's the sciences that inform us as to the nature of these problems. You also can't have a duty to do something if you don't have the power to do it. And that's where engineering in particular and the social sciences come in, so that there really has to be an integration of ethics with the sciences in order to understand our obligations to the environment. In the course of my working with Suk and other scientists in the university, I also came to be aware that as a matter of professional ethics, scientists and engineers are reluctant to talk about the moral, political, and social implications of their research. And so in my own research, I've now been trying to fill that role of sort of fleshing out what science is telling us, what engineering is telling us, and what it means for us as human beings, as citizens, and what it means as far as our moral responsibilities. And so in my research, I've done work on microbiology and soil ecology, and written on what that research shows us about our obligations as human beings. I've done research in cognitive psychology and moral psychology, and tried again to apply that to environmental problems. So that's my story. What else is that?
And I think the way we'll do this then is we'll let each of the panelists give their little introduction, and then after that we can open up everything for questions from the audience. So, Rebecca, you want to go next?
Sure. Okay, so I've prepared a short talk, and it's addressing the question that being on this panel motivated me to ask, and that is the intersection between teaching and interdisciplinary research. Now, in my own experience, the working with C, the development of the program and teaching courses in C, has affected my research agenda and my research itself. And this comes from that experience here at this university, but also getting involved in the Association for Environmental Studies and Sciences, which is an association, professional association, doing a lot of work in grappling with these issues and launching a new journal that is promoting interdisciplinary research. I took part on panels and have gone to that conference and other conferences. As you see it, this talk is reflecting on those experiences. So while interdisciplinary teaching and the development of this interdisciplinary courses and programs continues in many universities, especially this one now, the trend towards specialization in research also continues. And as literary scholar, my teaching, especially the development and preparation of courses, working with undergrads and graduate students on their research papers, etc., has been both a product and a source arising out of my research while also propelling that research forward. So how then would interdisciplinary teaching affect the dynamic give and take relationship between teaching and research that I think many of us experience? While responses to this question will certainly vary based on such arbitrary factors as individual experience and on more fixed ones such as research and teaching practices in a given discipline, I offer here somewhat arbitrary but also somewhat systematic answers to this question using my experience as in C as a case study. So first, according to the AESS, Association for Environmental Studies and Scientists, faculty are reluctant to engage in interdisciplinary research because, as they mention as a chief concern, they have the worry that they will not find a venue for publishing their work. Concomitantly, interdisciplinary teaching is considered a distraction, pulling an academic away from the specialization that her field demands, which is even more of a problem when he or she are on a tenure track or working towards advancement in their field. In the preparation for this panel, I surveyed the journals in my field to see if this is a legitimate concern. I kind of knew the answer already, but I wanted to see if things had changed. And they haven't. Those fears bear out. A predominance of journals focus on particular literary periods. Some focus on theory or a particular school of theory. Very few intersect two fields, such as literature and theology, or address a topic that crosses discipline, such as literature and the environment. But even that journal, the Interdisciplinary Studies in Literature and the Environment, rarely ventures beyond criticism that's literary in its structure, and those articles are usually on very narrow topics. Special issues of prominent journals often have special topics that would classify it as interdisciplinary. But what is the likelihood that the topic of a special issue would intersect the topic that you're working on? My own research production reflects the specialization of the field. My expertise in narrative theory and the history of the novel continues to be my method of research, forming my method of research. As a graduate student in Boston, I was inspired by developments in literary theory that investigated the narrative act, telling a story, from the perspectives of power dynamics and performance. The linguist Noam Chomsky, the literary critic Lawrence Buell, whose field is environmental criticism, and the theologian Elizabeth Schubert-Fiorenzi were my inspiration. And they all called for challenging the intentional message of narrative, to look at narrative specifically from a point of suspicion, unpack them, to question the power of narrative in numerous ways. If history is written by the victor, then, as Edward Said argued, it is the job of literary theory to start the revolution. And I was very much involved in this project and still continue to find that important work. I mention this to characterize how a large number of theorists view the narrative act as not just an aesthetic production, not just as a valuable, even necessary part of social and political discourse, but also as an artifact that is put to a set of uses, not all of them good, and as a thing that can be manipulated. And so we should question our stories, and for our own good, not put too much faith in their power. If I had remained ensconced in my very special world of novelists and romantic poets, I would have continued to revel in their construction of the church of nature while trying to tear that church down brick by brick. But life as a teacher at the University of Dayton led me to think seriously about vocation. It also helped that UD paid me $2,000 one summer to think about vocation, and so that's what I did. I then decided to take my research and teaching into a more interdisciplinary direction, developed courses in literature and the environment, and got involved in C, and sought out interdisciplinary conferences. And this was new territory for me. I had not been prepared for interdisciplinary work in any way in graduate school. And here we come to a moment of discovery, often in a case study. At the conferences I attended, which were very interdisciplinary, bringing together scientists, social scientists, artists, and humanists, panels were not so interdisciplinary. Psychologists presented together in one panel, economists in another. I went to the panels with psychologists, economists, physicists, and biologists. It was very enlightening, even though I always had the feeling, or often, that this was their second-tier work. Their first-tier work would be presented at the professional conference of their particular field. More enlightening, though, were the conversations afterwards, or during coffee breaks, when you were much more likely to hear the biologist or the psychologist's take on a broader, tougher issue, or when the biologist or psychologist would engage and challenge you. And surprisingly, I heard the same challenge from different people in different disciplines, and relatively often, mostly from scientists, but also from some social scientists, and it was some version of this. When it comes to environmental degradation or global climate change, we don't have the right story. I think reflecting on that despair that Dan Fouke mentioned. We don't have the right story. We need the right story. You know something about stories. Looked at me with expectation. Then there would be that look that communicated a lot. Can't you literary types come up with the right story and help us scientists out a little bit? The first time I heard this challenge, albeit more of a plea than a challenge, I was tempted to explain that literary types debunked the idea of the so-called right story about 2 decades ago. And they need to get with the times. Read some Said and Baba and Spivak. But I was also intrigued and bewildered that an academic could make such a statement. And so I grilled these people further, in I hope a gentle way. And the first time I remember very clearly, the scientist I was talking to began to talk about the power of myth in a very passionate and committed way. When the same experience was repeated, albeit in different forms, I became more aware than ever before how isolated and isolating my particular world was. So what did I discover? First, these conferences and encounters do not lead me to master the tools of another discipline. I do not use GIS or quantum physics in my work, but continue to rely on the methodology of narrative theory. But they did make me much more aware of what my students learn in their classes on a deeper and more complex level. And I can use that to my advantage in the classroom and detect the synergies of their thoughts. And this has proven very rewarding in my work, particularly a book project that I'm now finishing up. This benefits my research, but if I were not looking for these ways that students synthesize disciplinary contradictions, I would probably not spot them. And this helps my research in the same way my conversations at interdisciplinary conferences do. They challenge my assumptions that I've come to accept, and more importantly, they lead me to ask different questions. This has proven to be very valuable, not just in finding publication venues, but more importantly, has given meaning to my research. Currently, I'm finishing a book on the concept of property and ownership in literature, and I'm starting a new, smaller project examining narrations of global climate change. Still very intrigued by that question or plea, how do we tell the right story? And in both works, I've been positively influenced by that plea. My answer is to use the story as a way to talk about the problem. And I'm not the only literary scholar to do this by any means, but if you look at the literary theorists, philosophers, historians, theologians engaged in this kind of work, at the stuff I am reading now, the interdisciplinary component, the awareness of what other people are talking about in other disciplines is there. So what has involvement in C done for me as a researcher? It has enabled me to ask questions that I would have not asked as a grad student or a specialist. And more significantly, and on a personal note, it has given me motivation, going back to that sense of vocation.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Okay. And actually pick up a lot of nice things from what you just said. And I think what I'll do is I'll start with a very brief introduction of my own research, and then how C provides a nice platform for the interdisciplinary collaboration, both in research and in teaching. And my own research is mostly, well, first of all, I work in geology department.
Excuse me, you might be getting some feedback.
And but I'm a geographer, So don't know much about rocks. I make maps, and well, I do looking at spatial patterns. That's what geographers do. And my specific research area is mostly on climate change. And if you want to go to the specialization, and I look at how climate change affects the hydrological cycle. So basically look at how it will change the spatial and temporal distribution of precipitation. And so that's my main research focus. And there are a couple of things that I want to say that C has really provided a nice platform. Well, first of all, coming from my background, I'm always very used to the idea of interdisciplinary collaborations. First of all, geography department has always been a big part of everything, and this says it's a collection of academic misfits, but basically we have physical geographers and doing their very specific science, and then we have human geographers, which have a very wide range of spectrum from like Marxism and feminism on one end, and very, very conservative economic geographers on the other. So it's always been a fun place to be. And my postdoc was at Penn State. I was involved in a very large project on assessing the potential impacts of climate change. So my research is usually the first step. I provide a future scenario. And then what that scenario mean in terms of agriculture, in terms of ecological change, in terms of coastal hazards. And those all involve collaborations with experts in different areas. So I was very comfortable with that setting. But when I'm here, when I moved here, and I work in the geology department, and there's no other geographers on campus, so there comes C. And there are a couple of things. In terms of research, I found that C provides a place where I meet other people or interested in similar in environmental issues. So spawning from there, there's a very very nice outcome of a couple of very successful collaborations. So for example, I collaborated with Dr. Sidhu, and we worked together on the funded project, basically looking at the carbon footprint of Wright Pat Air Force. So he was looking at the energy piece, so basically the carbon emission part. So I was trying to be a nice guy, looking at, okay, now how much carbon they actually can absorb based on their land use and other aspects of it. So we developed a GIS model, and to look at basically the purpose of the research is to help them to develop a plan to achieve carbon neutrality, which is a long way, very, very far away from there. But so that's one, and also I worked with Dr. Andrew Chason from Chemistry department, and we put together a proposal on how to use a geothermal energy. And again, Dr. Chason, the engineer, he's going to look at the details of the design. And I was looking at the geological settings and where are the the places where had the most geothermal energy potentials. So, and also I worked with some people from biology department. We look at the wetland restoration and using GIS to help manage the data and also monitor how the wetland is doing. So there are some very successful research collaborations, and I think C provides the platform where I can meet those people and we start talking about it. And another big piece is, of course, teaching. And ever since I got here, I always want to have a course in climate change. Of course, not only because that's my baby, I think it's fascinating science, and also I think there are too much discrimination around, and I felt it was really my duty to set things straight, and but of course climate is not part of the traditional geology curriculum, and it's not part of the curriculum in any specific departments here. And so when Bob involved me in C, and I said, Bob, can I have a climate course? And I got what I actually, more than what I asked for. And instead I got a team-taught course in global environmental change. So I talked a lot about climate change, but also I collaborated with a faculty from biology department to look at what it means for the whole biosphere and for biodiversity. So that was a fun experience. So it was great, and I learned a lot, and and I think the students actually learned a lot more from the interaction of those two pieces. And so the next thing, what I was just beginning to think about, and actually Rebecca mentioned in her research, which I was really interested to find out more, is there's really so much science you can put in there. It doesn't matter how many times you tell them that CO2 is increasing, and no matter how many pieces of evidence you present that this CO2 is really from human activities. And there's just something in there, and that is really hard to change. And naive, I'm scientists, I'm very naive, and says, okay, I give you the data, I give you the charts, what else do you want from me? And so I think in the future there are lots of potential to look at how psychology and narratives and how people put the story together affect people's reception of the ideas, and also how they not only their idea is not simply what you teach them. They develop, they construct their own little architecture of information. And science is only one piece, and how other pieces can inform so that they can build a structure from scientific point of view. Hopefully it's more accurate structure, but also inform their motivation, their action, their motivation to actually act. So I found that's a very satisfying experience.
Good. Thanks. Thank you, Charlotte. Kevin.
So in the same theme of interdisciplinary research, I want to start with this. In my previous life in research and scholarship was in satellite thermal management, not C. Worked with NASA for a number of years, and it was interesting. It was great. I had a number of doctoral students come through. Wasn't interdisciplinary at all, and it was difficult to connect that work that I was doing to my courses, or to integrate that work into the courses I was doing. I eventually did, toward the end of that research, developing a course in aerospace thermal management. But then I became part of C. So I have 3 experiences I want to share to start with. Is we developed C. Now, as we developed C, one of the first courses that we offered was ASI 320, Cities and Energy. And we had a historian, we had an engineer, a physicist, and an English professor all involved in the same course. And I must say that I was a little skeptical about the value of the English professor in the course. Although now when you hear Rebecca offering a very eloquent description of her research and not seeing the same eloquence in mine, I realized that there was a lot of value, and I have to say the literature that we read through the course of the semester really planted images of what it is we were trying to do throughout. And in fact, that was the thing that struck me most about that whole semester. I thought it was a great course, but those images were the things that stuck most. That was the first thing. So about that time, I started a project with Vectrin. Vectron is a natural gas provider for the region, and we had developed some analytics to be able to identify the worst buildings in all of their customer base in Ohio and hopefully Indiana eventually. And so we did. And we sent mailers, we sent letters offering free assessments, energy assessments of their buildings to the worst. And the response rate was less than 1%. It was horrible. However, because of this incubating involvement in C, got involved with a community organization in Wilmington just as a test case. It's called Energize Clinton County, group of 25-year-olds then, who came back to Wilmington after DHL left the city, taking 3/4 of the jobs away, with an idea for green jobs development in the area. And I thought maybe we could work through them to reach their community for this program to actually have legs. And so we did. They organized a community meeting. The response was 100% of every building owner invited, and the response to permitting us to doing assessments of their facilities was 100%, and the action rate was nearly 75%. It was the greatest example of, at least in this area, why an interdisciplinary approach was so powerfully important. I've been involved in the Fit Center as well. So that's going along, and as you know, maybe I helped to establish the master's program in renewable and clean energy. And so another question that emerged was, how can we take this interdisciplinary research and this need for interdisciplinary research and bring it into the curriculum and even let it drive the curriculum? So involvement in C connected me to Dan Falk and Suk Sidhu, who were integrating what's called community-based research into their C401 class. It's about doing research, expanding knowledge, but connecting it to community organizations as equal partners. So that's what I began trying to do. And I did. So effectively I created 2 courses. So both graduate courses and not interfacing with anybody in the C program. The C program to date is undergraduate focused, but influenced very much by the interactions of C. So my area is really energy informatics now. It's analytics of dealing with large amounts of energy data information, trying to turn it into actionable energy reduction and renewable energy integration into society at a large scale. That's what I do. So developing the analytical techniques, growing those techniques, improving those techniques. So this course emerged. The techniques were then offered to the students as a means to apply to various community organizations, and we have. So Dayton Regional Green 3, let me just give some examples. Dayton Regional Green 3 is a regional sustainability organization. We had a student team develop an energy, a really good energy, commercial building energy rating tool that you could go to this Dayton Regional Green 3 site. We're now looking to expand this tool throughout the country and be having it being used elsewhere, and to see how it can be used to actually get action, and effectively trying to measure that action downstream. Working with other examples, another example would be actually Malink Corporation. So Malink Corporation is a southeastern Ohio, Cincinnati-based company trying to develop a means to create net zero energy buildings. These are buildings that on average over the course of the year use zero energy. They're producing as much energy as they're using. So one of the things that we did for them is develop the analytics to develop kind of what's called an energy dashboard system for a net zero energy building. And there is nothing else like this out in the world, and so now Malink is trying to sell this product that we've actually helped them develop. This summer, we worked with another company, and community doesn't mean it has to be a community-based service organization. It can be an organization that is entrepreneurial, trying to make business out of it. And so we supported another group that's a company up north called Weibel Energy Solutions, and they develop building energy controls. So, for example, in this building, you would think that the energy use is always optimal in terms of delivering the heating and cooling that we need. But the fact is, once a building is made, and once one technician does something to override a control, it's done. It's far from optimal. So what we're trying to do now is look at real-time building energy controls to be able to develop, and so we started this project this summer for them and made immense progress to develop real-time building energy optimization capabilities. And I'll conclude. I have to say, lots of other little projects have emerged, all of them publishable. I just wish I had time enough to be able to close on all the writing that I need to do. But what this has done, this interdisciplinary research has done, is I found a way to be able to integrate it into my courses. I found a way for this research emerging from these courses to build and grow, to be able to, from that, develop funding sources, to develop more scholarship and more productivity from a research standpoint than I ever have done. And like Rebecca said, I have to conclude, it's something that does address the need to connect to this notion of vocation as the university. So I'll close there.
Thanks, Kevin.